Hello everyone, this is sort of a video response to Anti-Bullshit Man and his video, Categorical versus Equivocal Judgment of Interpersonal Risk. Let's begin. The volition to do what I damn well please, and the freedom to know there's no such thing. Some key POINT as ellipses, although there's an extra period for some odd reason. Don't know why. Wrongdoing by omission, meaning you saw something and you didn't say anything. Wrongdoing by commission, you did something and you didn't say anything because in the long run, the rewards will be greater than the risk. Problems with both, because there's in fact problems with both. The problem with this is the whole content itself. Is the correct rhetoric being used, for example? Are the actions being taken into account? Are all the actions, rather, taken into account? And if there's an objection on omission or commission, then both are in fact permissible by their very nature, since the rewards could be greater to your person. And what ought to be done will steer volition itself, so that the series of conditions that transpire the volition might be considered the odds that should happen versus the odd that might happen if the selfish nature causes bonum per se, good within itself, to happen. Acting as if someone set you on fire. Acts permitted. The acts that permitted itself transpire this can be ascribed to the odds that will happen, the reaction will follow, and what will be impacted is the reaction of said permitted act. Actions committed. The acts that committed the volition to happen are the odds that will happen given the weight of the odds that will give the conclusion. A rubric of conclusionary happenstances, if you will. Quote, committed the act or omitted to prevent the act, there is no permitting nor not allowing, only wrongdoing, end quote. Anti-Bullshit Man. If there's no objection to one or the other, then that should be in fact wrongdoing, since one should object. So we will prescribe an ought not to have done that only if the ought to cause harm is actualized. So that is wrongdoing in itself. So yes, only wrongdoing. Risk versus reward, the 20 pieces of silver. Consequences by omission. First, a loose quote, and loose quote because I don't remember the quote exactly. This is by Anti-Bullshit Man, and I quote, in the face of badness or wrongness, this crumbles when it deals with risk exposure, end quote. Again, loosely quoted, because I don't remember the exact quote. Consequences by omission. If I see you steal your friend's money and don't say anything to him or her, I will be doing a disservice to that person. But if I come up to you and tell you whatever you're planning to do with this property, I want in. There's a risk in that, but also a reward in that as well. And the reward will dictate if I want in or not. If not, then the ought to tell his or her friend will be activated. Consequences by commission. If I steal my friend's money, but invested in a lottery ticket and later on down the road, the ticket I purchased is announced as the winner, then the reward would outweigh the risk, thus implying this might happen, ergo not a sure thing, but this might happen, right? Results of such shenanigans. This will be a win if you were an ethical egoist. You know that stealing your friend's money is wrong, but you also know that you might be the winner. No guarantees, right? So this is where the risk exposure comes in. Actions have consequences. Only you can prevent forest fires. By that logic, you can also cause them. Financial responsibility. Meaning risk of losing that friendship, and if you don't lose that friendship, he will forever not trust you with when it comes to his or her property. And trust, as Homo sapiens sapiens, is held to be one of the highest priorities in our daily lives. Financial liability. But the reward of financial gain to you, and of course, if your volition is predicated upon doing what you ought to do, financial gain to your friends as well. You ought to do the right thing and tell him or her that you took his or her property without his or her consent. but the reward quite simply outweighs the risk. Clearly, right? Ultimate consequences. But now, at this point, your friend might tell you that that was ethically misguided of you. You stole something that belonged to him or her, and since it was his or her property, technically he gets to keep it all. Maximum exposure, and the risk is you losing what you gained: financial stability and a friendship, both and or trust, in one fell swoop. A metaphorical burnt everything it touched kind of a deal. It can go that way as well. How do we qualify this? Then, how do we qualify this exactly? Just like in life, there are no guarantees. You stole something, then did something simply to maximize your own self-interest, and the risk of losing an endearing friend in the process shall be taken into account. Ethical egoism, the metaphorical stabbing. Results of ethical egoism. Ethical egoism fails since it doesn't take moral responsibility into account and allowing that distinction of what the case ought to have been. Quote, does this undermine the ethical stance that gambling with someone else's welfare or money is in itself wrong? Or does it undermine the doing, allowing distinction? End quote. Anti-bullshit man. The problem with distinctions are the lines drawn. How do we decide this? Do we come up with a rubric that points to yes or no and give qualifiers to what ought to happen? The malum in se, bad within itself, or bonum per se, good within itself, or do we risk it all for the summum bonum? All the good that will come out of your actions. The light in the train coming towards you. Light at the end of the tunnel, this can also be the train that ran over you. There is a light in the darkness, right? Because one of the cases is that people can do good things if their intentions are not good. The act of taking what is not yours is malum in se. The intent to steal was carried out by the volition to do so, but the reward was that you get to help people in the long run. Yes, that is wrongdoing, but with a good cause in mind. This, of course, crumbles with the risk exposure only if the outcome is malum in se, again given the outcome. Conclusions. If the purpose of your intent is to rid your friend of cancer by a just act, steal your friend's money to make your friend financially independent, then by the very nature of those actions, all is bonum per se, since this helps tremendously. But all avenues of said results are to be examined before the act is carried out. What will be the risk exposure? Is the result by commission or omission greater than the risk? Right actions. Purpose of the actions. What ought cost this? The purpose of your actions is for you to take every single ought into account, since this might have the ability to cause harm, and that is always high. One should act according to her or his oughts to happen if those oughts cause bonum per se. The result of actions. The results should be morally good if those oughts bring the best possible circumstance. If they don't, then they won't. Conclusions of the oughts. Quote, the effect of liberty to individuals is that they may do what they please. We ought to see what it will please them to do before we risk congratulations. End quote. Edmund Burke. Meaning the volition is not clean, but one ought to clean it before a volition takes place, so that the oughts are always bonum per se. Conclusions? A messy and awkward reach around. Points. I adhere to the underlying actions which dictates the answer only if it benefits and brings less harm with the most just results. Pessimistic realities, because there's always those. Sadly, there's no clear-cut answer, but it's in there somewhere. A rubric perhaps, a three-door choice, might be the answer if and only if, as I stated, brings the most beneficial outcome. But most actions clearly don't, since we behave mostly in a reward selfish sort of way. An endearing thought experiment. A final question, or a question to you. Would you stab a leprechaun if he bled chunks of gold and didn't hurt him? My misanthropic philosophical conclusions. Find what you love and let it kill you. Charles Bukowski. My final words are these. Get it? Keep this in mind. Any future reward pleases the senses because it has a certain immediate release of endorphins, gives you a sense of purpose. No action is ever taken if it doesn't give you an immediate sense of interest. Without first qualifying the interest to be good and do and not to do act. Also, an interest in the property that you seem to lack or have an interest in. And sadly, the imagination of a just reward is overpowering, which muddies the ought to do act. So in a sense, it is an interpersonal risk with equivocal judgments and the categorical imperatives of what ought should be done. If and only if the volition to do so is bonum per se. Anyway, that is all I have. Thank you all for watching. It means a lot. Praise Jesus.